Rhian was the only person there who was able to attempt the most important missions through time and space that were set by the sorcerers. For this reason, she was conscious of her value having substantially increased in their eyes. Not that it benefited her particularly, prestige being worthless in a land full of royal celebrities. In fact, it was a drawback, as she alone had to face the not inconsiderable dangers that such missions entailed. That they were all girls was by accident rather than design, for a suitably gifted boy had not been found for over 28 lunars, and the last one had come of age and left shortly after Rhian arrived on the tribute ship. She shivered as she remembered the terrifying ocean passage which had borne her to the northern harbour, the most remote and by far the most dangerous entry point to the imperial city, flanked by waves of churning gunmetal water that were high as mountains. Entry atop the waves, rather than beneath them, was impossible for any but Poseidon's ships, and not even the most foolhardy adventurer would attempt to pass through the siren-guarded sea gate. The hair on Rhian's neck stood on end as she recalled the song of the sirens, more bewitchingly beautiful than she knew could be imagined by anyone who had not heard it for themselves. They'd had to lock her in her room, chained to the floor by her ankles and to the ceiling by her wrists as they passed through the gate, for she would have been quite unable to resist plunging into the deadly ocean to reach them. Only the voice of the Queen could compare, but even this, whilst 1,000 times lovelier than any mortal voice, could not match the maddening pitch of the fabled merwomen. Once in a waking dream, Rhian had seen the siren mothers in the deep-sea abode, 3 of them lying on a smooth rocky plateau on the sandy ocean bed. Blue-black hair like coils of dark wet seaweed clung to naked bodies with greenish-yellow skin, oily like a fish to withstand the salty depths. Neither young nor old, but strange like the witches of monoliths, they were strong and muscular swimmers, intent upon the guardianship of their princeling brother, an elemental of such immense power he could effortlessly command large bodies of water to do his bidding. When Rhian had become trapped in their netherworld realm, which she had entered unawares at the visionary journey, one of the merwomen had come to her rescue, carrying the fire girl's dream body upon their glistening yellow back. She had been safely delivered to a land bridge, and had remembered the mermothers with gratitude ever since. These strong saltwater beings were quite different in appearance to the slender and youthful-looking freshwater undines who inhabited the sacred pools and wells of Albion. Their beautiful tails were a myriad of rainbow colours that changed with the seasons, and their silvery locks flowed like shining silk about their breasts. These youthful females, for never had a male of their kind been seen, could be languid and dolorous, or effervescent and playful, depending on the amount of mud brought down to them by streams, or the blossom that was carried on spring and summer breezes. Their tinkling laughter on such days never failed to bring joy to all who heard it. But, if their mood was depressed, they could be hostile and even dangerous to any who approached their waters with improper intent. Rhian paused in the courtyard to admire the miniature-coloured birds which nested in the magnificent silver-barked fruit tree at its centre. Rising from the midst of 4 concentric rings of ankle-deep water, each of them charged with the magic of a different element. As was her morning habit, she paddled carefully through each of the waters without removing her sandals, relishing anew the coolness over her feet. She stood beneath the fragrant canopy of leaves to select the juiciest-looking fruit from its branches. The clusters of purple fruits could not be found in her homeland, which was far too cold for such exotic fare, and once again served to remind her that whilst she was lonely and sad, there were pleasing compensations for her solitary existence. Notwithstanding the abominably hot and dry climate, delectable fruits and luscious vegetables grew in abundance and constituted the main diet of its inhabitants, who would rather have flung themselves onto the Sirens' rocks than eat any kind of animal flesh, and certainly not fish. Rhian was content to adhere to the diet, which was more than adequate for the sultry weather, although she still missed the fresh eggs her mother's chickens laid each day and the occasional rabbit stew. She felt a little guilty about the fish they had sometimes eaten, knowing what she did now about those fearful and sensitive creatures, not so distant kin of the Queen. Though she was not yet aware of it, the fresh, succulent diet and mineral-rich water had done wonders for Rhian's white complexion, which glowed like a pearl beneath the heavy locks of hair that did in fact match Caitlin's for silkiness and shine. Her limbs had grown long and lissom, and her waist was as narrow as those of the fairy girls who walked the emerald hills beside her, with laughter like tinkling bells, and hair that was golden as the dawn that kissed the walking flowers. Looking up at the sky, a glorious cross between the azure colour of forget-me-nots and deeper hue of bluebells, Rhian had the feeling it was probably quite late, and she should try to hurry along so as not to keep Damek waiting. The Inner Earth Sorcerer was famously cold, a result of his bloodline having been altered with prehistoric reptilian genes, and he was much easier to unimpress than he was to somehow please. Even when pleased, he was unfriendly, and nothing would change his tune, not even a sign from the golden god of a future history. The most she could hope for by way of reward, and even then seldom, was permission to visit the Hall of Records, guided by the highly regarded librarian, an ageless girl of limitless discretion who everybody wanted to be friends with. While she knew he would not do anything to explicitly harm her, Rhian could not get used to Damek's weird metallic aura and watchful, cynical expression, which always made her nervous at best and downright afraid at worst. He was quite capable of making her jump out of her skin by doing nothing at all in his cold, silent way, and his habit of climbing halfway up the wall as he instructed her was something she would never get used to. Sometimes when she returned from a portal visit, he'd be waiting for her on the ceiling, which always made her hair stand on end. This feeling was exacerbated by the fact that of all the duties she had to perform as part of her tribute service, those set by Damek were by far the most difficult and potentially dangerous. Given the dearth of other travellers, Rhian was required to participate in every potentially life-threatening mission he could think of. The program involved spending the best part of a lunar month with each of the elemental scientific departments in rotation, with special quintessential ceremonies at certain times of year, including equinoxes, solstices, and other dates selected by the astronomer-in-chief. These were connected with the slowing of time that was assiduously maintained within the imperial centre and involved with the subjugation of the Time Lord Dagon, who for long had been kept chained inside Cumbravea, the tallest mountain on the island. The formidable stress of this untenable situation with the Time Lord, which would not go on forever, much though they would have liked it to, was the primary reason why Atlanteans had long ago learned to keep their emotions in check and went to great lengths to ensure that chaos never broke out in the hot zone. The atmosphere in general, therefore, tended to vacillate between zen-like calm and mind-numbing torpor. It was too hot to get excited anyway, and boredom was a price they were willing to pay for any extension they could secure to this very long-standing but sadly impermanent arrangement. Although it went unspoken, in public at least, it was widely understood that whilst time had been held pretty much in check for at least 3 epochs, it could not be chained indefinitely. What might happen when Dagon finally broke free was the one main thing that nobody dared consider. That he was slowly building up to an earth-shattering rage was a thought too frightening to contemplate. This unspoken thought hung over all of them like a thunderous cloud that never brought the much-needed rain, but hovered over their heads like a silent sword of Damocles, ready to fall at any moment. Denial, was not just a river in Egypt, but a way of life in Atlantis. Rhian paddled back across the water and headed out into the public street outside the building, which, like most of the streets, was well shaded by almond trees and date palms, with beautiful copper drinking fountains on every corner. Everywhere the walls were constructed of pearlescent marble, which shone like moonlight and also paved the streets. A world away from the squat round dwellings, hard grey monoliths, and muddy winding paths of old Albion. Buildings of the imperial city were designed to hold at bay the often unbearable heat of the Atlantean atmosphere, but over the past year or so, rooms outside the royal pyramids had become uncomfortably hot. The topic on everyone's mind was, indeed, the weather, though everyone refused to associate it with the pressure cooker of time beneath Combrevea. The climate was shifting, and not for the better. Everybody wondered how much hotter it was going to get, and if it was ever going to rain properly again. There were frequent tempest-strength winds, and all 8 kingdoms experienced periodic floods that were often quite serious, but the longed-for rain declined to fall on the central island. Delicious fresh water was nonetheless in plentiful supply through the simple process of desalination and stupendous magic of the sorcerers who infused it with the elixir of life. But everyone still missed the fall of cooling rain on their sizzling streets. As usual, Rhian couldn't help looking up and around her as she walked in the direction of Dagon's pyramid. Even after many lunar months, she was not fully accustomed to the amazing magnificence of the imperial centre, which overflowed with high magic as much as it did with an endless abundance of wealth. Whilst various forms of magic were in common use throughout the empire, each in accordance with the climate, geography, and character of the people who lived in a particular region, nothing could have prepared her for the supreme cultivation she found at the heart of Atlantis. At the centre of the island rose a vast triangular structure they called the Great Pyramid, wherein lived the royal family and their retinue. The dazzling white walls were continually drenched with water, which poured from the copper-tipped peak and spilled down into 4 concentric waterways, which flanked the sides of the pyramid and kept fresh water flowing around the centre. In between each channel of water were immaculate bowered orchards and flower gardens, with ornamental rainbows fixed by the Fire Lords, and myriad-coloured songbirds that were conjured as gifts to the Queen by Lords of Air. Ranged around this central royal zone were the 4 quarters, each of which had special characteristics which signified their elemental mastery and distinguished them from the others. Despite Damek's brooding presence, the Earth quarter she currently resided in was Rhian's favourite, partly because the immediacy of nature reminded her a little of home, but also because of the affectionate animals which had no fear of humans. An adorable variety of prickleback could be found snuffling around in sections of hedgerows, whilst tiny velvet-backed rodents nestled and dozed in the branches of specially grown hazel trees. The region was also adorned with a spectacular array of flowers, herbs, and other well-tended plants, which in turn attracted butterflies, bees, and other benign insects that were nurtured with great care by the attentive earth sorcerers. The meticulous cultivation of plants and animals to generate the strongest and most appealing species had been practiced there for millennia. But in recent years, the sorcerers had begun to manipulate the genetic makeup of natural creatures in unnatural ways. Not everyone was comfortable with this development, and there were rumours that it was contributing to a destabilization of the conditions which helped to ensure time stood almost still at the centre of Earth's wheel. Even worse, there were also indications that the sorcerers were venturing beyond the strict laws that had long been in place regarding the genetic improvement of the Atlantean population. Not content with eliminating disease and perfecting physical appearances, Bored aristocrats were asking to have their sexual organs enhanced in ways which were corrupting them with an excess of pleasure at the expense of much needed temperance. Rhian knew that such behaviour had all but ensured Atlantis would fail to survive the remainder of its epoch intact. She had nothing much in common with the average Atlantean citizen, and had not made any real friends, though she enjoyed the company of the exuberant water lord Jason, who sometimes expressed emotions more strongly than other people she'd encountered there. He also had a semblance of humour, another rare trait on an island full of typically grave civilians who seldom laughed. Now and again she crossed paths with Despoinia, keeper of the Hall of Records, a nereid so charmingly discreet that everyone she encountered was pleased by her and made no effort to hide their thoughts. Rhian liked her so much she felt shy in her presence and wished they could meet more often. By now she was approaching Damek's broad pyramid, location of both his own living quarters and the Earth Elemental Science Department. Its most spectacular feature was a delightful stepped garden which covered the structure from base to top, and where, like all the other pyramids, it was crowned with a green copper peak. In this case, the water stream had been converted into an irrigation and misting system for the exotic plants he had adapted to the broiling climate. Monkeys and parrots inhabited palms of the higher levels, whilst adorable sloths and red pandas, miniature spotted cats and bears, things she'd never seen before entering the sacred island, dozed in denser foliage around the base. Less enormous than the awesome water and fire departments, but considerably more massive than the ethereal air base, the Earth Pyramid was Rhian's favourite place in the Imperial Centre, thanks to these wonderful friendly animals. At least, it would have been if Damek were not inside, she thought glumly, approaching the outer gate that was flanked on either side by intimidatingly huge statues of bulls. She looked up nervously as she passed between them. They reminded her of the fearsome half-man, half-bull creature that he had created 5 moons past. Minotaur, he'd called it. Virtually indestructible, it was destined to terrorize Earth for many thousands of years, changing story from epoch to epoch, but always with the same magical name. She shuddered just to think of it. Rhian was far from being superstitious, but surely it was unholy to create such terrible beasts. Uneasily she recalled its first ear-splitting bellow, which echoed through the tunnels beneath the pyramids, causing all of the Atlanteans to stop dead in their tracks and stare into the future for the first time in an eon, knowing that doom was being spelled. These tunnels connected the elemental departments, not only with each other, but also the Hall of Records, public library, and royal palace. In the wake of the Minotaur's bellow, Poseidon had ordered the tunnels to be sealed whilst Damek led the beast to a specially constructed stable he called the Labyrinth, a level below the catacombs of graves. There had been a sort of public outcry following this unprecedented event, which shattered the Pythagorean silence and Platonic air of reason in one fell swoop, and seemed to make the whole of Atlantis shift closer towards the undefinable calamity that everyone was trying not to think of. Damek had been called before the king and the full council of sorcerers to explain his dangerous action, an occasion which resulted in the Minotaur being consigned to the labyrinth for eternity, or until such times as it could be destroyed. No real explanation had been forthcoming, Damek's reptilian nature showing neither remorse nor concern in the face of kingly displeasure. Now they had been reopened, Rhian could have used those tunnels to walk between the pyramid and an entrance close to her living quarters. But, unlike many Atlanteans, she still preferred to be above ground and enjoyed her morning walk along the quiet streets. Had it been later in the day, she would have retreated underground, the afternoon sun being unbearably hot, especially for her pale, sensitive skin. She sighed as she approached the sorcerers, administrators, and assistants, inclining her head in silent greeting as they ushered her along a corridor composed of strange angles. What on earth would the madman have in store for her today?